Hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day. Today's story hits a breaking point because the proof Tu Tieu paid everything for doesn't stay hidden anymore. Yuri takes it straight to the police, and within hours Lin's perfect mask starts cracking. The scariest part. When fear finally corners her, she doesn't cling to loyalty. She reaches for betrayal. It started with a decision Yuri didn't make lightly. He stood outside the farmhouse before dawn, the sky still washed in grey, phone in his hand, replaying the audio for the third time. Not because he enjoyed hearing it, because every time Mr. Tuan's voice surfaced in that recording, calm and instructive, it made Yuri's stomach turn colder. This wasn't gossip, this wasn't he said, she said. This was a plan spoken out loud, Lin's voice. Too sweet at the start, then sharper when she thought no one could touch her. Mr. Tuan's voice, measured, confident, the tone of someone explaining steps like a teacher guiding a student through a lesson. Trust, documents, control, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Mrs. Lan's name, spoken like she was a door to be opened, not a person to be protected. Uri shut his eyes for 1 second, then opened them with a decision locked in. He made 3 copies of everything, 1 on a flash drive, 1 uploaded to secure cloud storage with a password only he knew, 1 forwarded to a contact he trusted, someone who wouldn't panic, wouldn't talk, wouldn't accidentally leak it. Not because Yuri loved drama, because men like Mr. Tuan didn't lose by accident. They lost when every exit was blocked. By the time the city woke up, Yuri was already on the road. The district police station looked ordinary. Painted walls, a guard near the entrance, a couple of people waiting with paperwork and tired faces. But Yuri understood what it really was. The one place charm and money couldn't rewrite the truth fast enough. Inside, a young officer glanced up. "Can I help you?" Yuri kept his voice calm and low. "I need to submit evidence for an ongoing case. Audio evidence." That single phrase changed everything. The officer's posture straightened, his eyes sharpened, no longer casual. "Please follow me." They led him to a small room, a table, 2 chairs, a fan humming softly above, like the building itself was trying to stay neutral. A senior investigator stepped in, older, unreadable, the kind of face that didn't give comfort and didn't need to. "You're Yuri?" he asked. "Yes." Yuri placed the flash drive on the table, but he didn't push it forward like a dramatic gesture. He set it down the way you would set down something dangerous. "This recording includes Lin and Mr. Tuan discussing a plan," Yuri said carefully, "a fake report, property manipulation, and a corporate move to buy shares through third parties." The investigator didn't touch the drive right away. "How did you obtain it?" "A witness recorded it at a cafe yesterday," Yuri replied. He didn't add details that could put the witness in immediate danger. "I'm submitting it to protect the victim and prevent further harm." The investigator's pen paused. "Who is the victim?" Uri's throat tightened. Not from fear, from restraint. He could picture Tu Tieu's face when she realised her mother had been hidden behind a locked door. He could picture Mrs. Lan, exhausted, confused, still trying to believe she hadn't raised a liar. "A family member," Yuri said. "Someone being manipulated. The situation is moving fast." The investigator stared at him for a long second, then finally took the flash drive. "Do not confront them," he warned, voice flat. "Do not call them. If they sense pressure, they'll destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses." Yuri nodded once. "I won't act alone. That's why I'm here." The audio played. In that small room, the voices sounded even uglier than they had on Yuri's phone. No background music, no friendly chatter to soften it. Just the truth, bare and sharp. When it ended, the investigator shut off the speaker and didn't speak right away. Silence filled the room like a weight. Then he said quietly, "This is serious." Yuri didn't show relief. He only inhaled once, controlled. "So what happens now?" "We open an investigation immediately," the investigator replied, "and we bring them in before they run." Yuri left the station and didn't go home. Instead, he drove to a cafe on the other side of town. A place he'd seen Lin visit before, soft music, dark corners, the kind of place people chose when they believed they were untouchable. He parked far enough not to be obvious, close enough not to lose the entrance, and he waited. Not because he wanted to be the hero, because he wanted the truth to arrive in handcuffs, not in rumours. Inside the cafe, Lin sat with her posture perfect, hair neat, lips painted like armour. Across from her sat Mr. Tuan, calm as always, his body language saying he was in control of the room, even while seated. They looked like two people discussing business. That's what made Yuri's skin crawl. Then the door swung open. 3 uniformed officers walked in. They didn't shout, they didn't rush. Their movements were calm, precise, and unavoidable. And yet the entire cafe reacted like a storm had entered. A conversation died mid-sentence. A spoon froze above a cup. Even the music felt quieter. One officer stopped beside Lin's table. "Ms. Lin?" Lin blinked too quickly. "Yes, that's me." The officer's gaze shifted slightly. "Mr. Tuan?" Mr. Tuan lifted his eyes slowly like he was being interrupted during something unimportant. "What is this?" he asked, voice low and controlled. "We need both of you to come to the station for questioning," the officer replied. "Now." Lin's fingers tightened around the table edge so hard her knuckles went pale. "Questioning? I don't understand. We didn't do anything." The officer raised a phone, screen glowing. "We have an audio recording." In that single instant, Lin's face drained of colour. It was so fast it looked unreal, like someone wiped her confidence away with one swipe. Her mouth parted, but no sound came out. Mr. Tuan's jaw shifted once, tiny, controlled. But Lin saw it anyway. He wasn't surprised, he was calculating. And in that microsecond, Lin understood the worst truth of all. If he had to choose between saving himself and saving her, he would not hesitate. The officer spoke again, not dramatic, just final. "Stand up." Lin stood too quickly. Her chair scraped the floor with a harsh squeal that made half the cafe turn and stare. Her perfect mask cracked, and when it did, her survival instinct surfaced like a drowning hand grabbing anything. She pointed at Mr. Tuan. "It was him," Lin blurted, voice shaking but sharp. "He planned everything. He's the mastermind." The room didn't just go quiet, it went hollow. Mr. Tuan turned his head slowly toward her. His eyes were ice, cold, precise, suddenly focused. "Lin," he said, her name sounding like a warning. But Lin was already falling, and she refused to fall alone. "He told me what to do," she insisted, louder now, like volume could build a shield. "The fake report, the assets, the shares. He instructed every step. I just followed him." Someone at another table let out a soft gasp. A few heads leaned in. People looked like they were watching a scene they hadn't paid for. Mr. Tuan leaned forward slightly, voice dropping into something almost gentle. "You're making a mistake." Lin swallowed hard, then forced herself to speak again, eyes darting, breath uneven. "No, you are. Take him. I'll cooperate. I'll tell you everything." Handcuffs clicked open, and outside, through the cafe glass and dim lighting, Yuri sat in his car, hands steady on the steering wheel, face unreadable. He didn't smile, because he knew this wasn't the end. It was the first crack. The police separated them, guiding them toward different vehicles. Lin kept turning her head like she expected Mr. Tuan to rescue her with a look. He didn't. Mr. Tuan walked with his posture straight, calm, worn like a suit, like he believed the world still belonged to him. Yuri started his engine slowly and followed at a careful distance. Not chasing, not panicking, just staying close enough to watch what came next. Because now Lin was in survival mode, and Mr. Tuan would not fall quietly. And somewhere far away, Tu Tieu still didn't know that the proof she bled for had finally entered the system, and the system had started moving. The police vehicles pulled away from the cafe in 2 different directions, 2 separate cages for 2 people who had spent months pretending they were untouchable. Yuri followed at a careful distance, not close enough to look suspicious, not far enough to lose them. His hand stayed steady on the wheel, but inside his chest something kept tightening, like a knot being pulled slowly until there was no room left for doubt. When he arrived at the district station, everything felt colder. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, turning skin pale and shadows too clean. The air smelled like paperwork and old coffee. Doors clicked shut with a sound that didn't need to be loud to feel final. An officer met Yuri at the entrance and gave him a quick nod. "You can wait here. If we need additional details, we'll call you in." Yuri sat on a plastic chair that didn't forgive anyone. His phone buzzed twice with messages he didn't open. He didn't need more noise in his head. He watched the hallway instead. Files moving from hand to hand, uniforms passing like the building itself had a pulse. And then he saw them. Lynn first. She walked fast, like speed could undo consequences. Her hair was still neat, but her face wasn't. Her lipstick looked too sharp against skin that had gone pale. She kept swallowing, like her throat was closing around every lie she'd ever told. Behind her came Mr. Tuan. His hands were cuffed, but his posture stayed straight. He moved with the same controlled calm he always wore, like he'd brought his own air into the station. When Lynn's eyes flicked to Yuri, hatred flashed in them, raw, sudden, desperate. "This is you!" she hissed, barely moving her lips as an officer guided her forward. "You did this!" Yuri didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her anger was just fear looking for somewhere to land. Mr. Tuan slowed for half a second, turning his head just enough to meet Yuri's gaze. His eyes weren't furious. They were measuring, as if Yuri wasn't a man, just a problem to solve. "You think you've won?" Mr. Tuan said softly, voice low enough that only Yuri could hear. Yuri leaned forward, matching his volume. "I think you're finally where you belong." Mr. Tuan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a threat. "Belonging is a luxury," he murmured. "Surviving is a skill." Then the officer pushed him onward and the moment was gone. The interrogation rooms were small, and that was the point. No windows, no distractions, nowhere to look except at the truth sitting across the table. Lynn was placed in one room, Mr. Tuan in another, separated like a chessboard splitting in half. Yuri stayed in the waiting area, jaw tight, every muscle controlled. He wasn't allowed inside. He wasn't the investigator. He was only the one who opened the door. But he could still feel what was happening behind those walls, because Lynn wasn't built for pressure. She was built for performance, and in a room where performance didn't matter, her panic would always win. Inside Lynn's room, the investigator sat down and opened a folder. He didn't slam it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need theatrics. "Ms. Lynn," he began evenly, "you were brought in based on audio evidence and preliminary reports. Before we proceed, you have the right—" "I'll talk," Lynn cut in instantly, eyes shiny, breath uneven. "I'll cooperate. I'll tell you everything." The investigator's pen hovered. "Everything is a big word," he said calmly. "Start from the beginning, names, dates, actions." Lynn's hands were clasped so tight her fingers trembled. She tried to speak smoothly, but her voice kept cracking at the edges. He said the only way to control the situation was to break trust," she began. "He talked about DNA, about a fake report. He told me to make it convincing so she would believe." The investigator's eyes stayed steady. "Who is she?" Lynn hesitated. This was the point where her confession became a blade, the point where she couldn't pretend she was only a helper anymore. Her survival instinct won. "Mrs. Lan," she whispered. In the hallway outside, Yuri stared at the wall until the urge to stand up and break something faded. Back in the room, Lynn continued faster now, like if she poured enough words out she could wash herself clean. And then he said, "We should sell assets," she said, voice trembling. "Liquidate everything we could touch. He said we could buy shares, take control. He said the company would be ours." The investigator leaned back slightly. "Which company?" Lynn swallowed. "Mrs. Ngier's company." The pen moved steadily. "Did you benefit financially from this plan?" "Yes," Lynn admitted, voice shaking. "He promised I'd be secure. He promised he'd protect me." The investigator's voice didn't change. Did he? Lin's eyes flashed with bitter panic. No, look where I am. The investigator placed his pen down. Cooperation may be considered, but it doesn't erase what you did. Lin's breath hitched. Panic surged again, and she pushed harder, desperate to prove she was useful. I can give you more, she insisted. He has documents, numbers, people, contacts who help him. He's done this before. The investigator narrowed his eyes slightly. Then give specifics, not emotions. Lin nodded too quickly. He keeps everything in a safe at his office, and he has another phone he uses for plans. He told me not to write anything down, not to leave trails. He taught me how to speak in code. A thin laugh escaped her, bitter, shaky. He thought he was so smart. In Mr. Tuan's room, the air felt different. He didn't fidget. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He sat with his hands folded as if he was the one conducting the interview. The investigator slid a transcript onto the table. This is a recording, he said. Your voice is on it. Mr. Tuan glanced at it once and shrugged faintly. Many voices sound similar. We also have witness confirmation, the investigator replied, and we have Ms. Lin's statement. At Lin's name, something dark flickered in Mr. Tuan's eyes. Brief, controlled, dangerous. She's unstable, he said calmly. She'll say anything to save herself. The investigator didn't blink. Is she lying? Mr. Tuan leaned forward slightly, calm as ever. You're asking the wrong question. Then give the right answer, the investigator replied. Mr. Tuan's tone softened, almost friendly, as if he were offering advice. Officer, people like Yuri enjoy playing the hero. They create stories where they're the saviour and everyone else is a villain. It's charming, but charm isn't evidence. The investigator tapped the transcript. This is evidence. Mr. Tuan's eyes stayed steady. Audio without context. Context, the investigator repeated, doesn't change intent. Mr. Tuan exhaled slowly, then smiled. Small, controlled, confident. Intent is a word people use when they lack facts, he said. The investigator watched him for a long beat, then stood. We'll see how confident you are after the search warrant is executed. For the first time, Mr. Tuan's smile faltered. Just barely. Not fear, calculation shifting. Back in the waiting area, an officer called Yuri into a small office. The senior investigator looked up at him, face unreadable, voice steady. Mr. Uri, he said, Ms. Lin is cooperating. She's given us locations and details we can act on immediately. Yuri's heart thudded once hard. And Mr. Tuan? He's resisting, the investigator replied. He's trying to redirect, discredit and delay. That's his style. Uri nodded slowly. Yes, that's him. The investigator leaned forward. We're preparing a warrant based on the recording, her statement, and your supporting information. But I'm going to be direct with you. Uri's jaw tightened. Go ahead. If Mr. Tuan senses the net closing, the investigator said, he may attempt to destroy evidence or pressure people. Keep your distance. Do not provoke him. Uri's voice came out low, controlled. I won't make it messy. The investigator held his gaze. Good, because this isn't a single arrest. This is a chain. Uri stood, body calm while his mind burned. Then let's pull it all the way, he said. As he walked back into the hallway, his phone buzzed again. Another message he didn't open. He didn't need to, because he already knew who it would be from. Tu Tieu. She had been living on fear and hope, waiting for any sign that her mother could be brought back into the light. Yuri turned toward the exit. Outside, the afternoon had shifted toward evening. Shadows stretched longer on the pavement like the day itself was preparing for something darker. He inhaled once, slow and steady. Today wasn't the end. Today was the first time Lin chose herself over her master, and the first time Mr. Tuan realised the people he controlled could also be the ones who ruined him. But somewhere behind another closed door in this same building, a truth still waited. Quiet, fragile, and more important than any arrest. Mrs. Lan. And the question that could break everything open: if Linh was ready to betray Mr. Tuan to survive, what would Mr. Tuan do to make sure she never got the chance? Yuri delivers the audio proof to the police, triggering an immediate investigation that catches Linh and Mr. Tuan off guard. Officers confront them at a cafe and escort both to the station, where Lin's fear shatters her composure. Realizing Mr. Tuan will sacrifice her to survive, Linh blurts that he is the mastermind behind the fake DNA scheme, the asset grab, and the plan to manipulate company shares. In interrogation, Linh cooperates desperately, naming victims, admitting her role, and offering specifics: an office safe, a second phone, and hidden contacts, hoping for leniency. Meanwhile, Mr. Tuan stays cold and calculating, dismissing the recording as contextless and trying to discredit Yuri. Investigators prepare a search warrant, warning Yuri that Mr. Tuan may destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses as the net tightens.